Ezra's world was crumbling, and the weight of it was suffocating. Their tech startup in Seattle, once a beacon of hope, had tanked after a brutal investor pullout, leaving them drowning in debt and self-doubt. Desperate for an escape, they stumbled into the Velvet Haven, a gay bar tucked in Capitol Hill's neon-lit heart, chasing a fleeting moment of peace. The bar was alive, a kaleidoscope of laughter, music, and clinking glasses. Ezra, 28, non-binary, with auburn hair perpetually falling into their eyes, slumped at a corner table, nursing a whiskey sour. They weren't here to socialize, just to drown out the noise of failure. Their glasses fogged slightly from the warmth of the crowd, and their leather jacket felt like armor against the world. Then came Julian. He slid into the seat across from Ezra without invitation, his warm brown eyes catching the bar's dim light. At 32, Julian carried himself with a quiet confidence, his black skin glowing under the neon, his fitted sweater hugging his broad shoulders. "You look like you're carrying the world," he said, voice low but piercing. Ezra froze. No one had seen through them like that in years. "I'm just here to forget," Ezra muttered, staring into their drink. Julian leaned closer, undeterred. "Forgetting's overrated. Sometimes you gotta feel it to move past it." His words hit like a spark in the dark. Ezra didn't want to admit how much they needed to hear that. The bar pulsed around them, drag queens owning the stage, couples swaying to a synth beat, and strangers sharing stories over cocktails. Ezra hadn't planned to talk, but Julian's presence was disarming. He spoke of his life as a social worker, of fighting for queer youth in a system that often failed them. His passion was raw, unfiltered, and it stirred something in Ezra they thought was long buried. "Why'd you sit here?" Ezra asked, half expecting a flirty deflection. Julian's smile faded, his gaze steady. "Because you looked like you needed a friend. And maybe I did too." That night, they talked for hours, the bar fading into a blur. Julian shared how he'd lost his brother to addiction, how it drove him to help others. Ezra, hesitant at first, admitted their startup's collapse and the shame that clung to them like damp fog. For the first time in months, Ezra felt seen, not as a failure, but as someone still fighting. But the night wasn't all soft confessions. A man at the bar, mid-40s, wiry, with a shaved head and a too-tight shirt, kept glancing their way. His stare wasn't friendly. It was predatory, lingering too long on Ezra. Julian noticed too, his jaw tightening. "Ignore him," he whispered. "Some people come here for the wrong reasons." Ezra tried to brush it off, but the man's presence felt like a shadow creeping closer. As the night wore on, he approached, slurring about new faces and fresh meat. Julian stood, his frame imposing, and shut him down with a single, "Move along." The man backed off, but his smirk lingered, promising trouble. By closing time, Ezra's heart was a tangle of hope and dread. Julian walked them to their car, the Seattle rain slicking the streets. "You're stronger than you think," Julian said, his hand brushing Ezra's. Their fingers lingered, a spark igniting in the cold. "I don't feel strong," Ezra admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Julian's eyes softened. "You will." As Ezra drove home, the man from the bar's face haunted them. Something about him felt wrong, dangerously wrong. They didn't know it yet, but that night at the Velvet Haven had set something in motion, something far bigger than a chance meeting. The next week, Ezra couldn't shake Julian from their mind. His voice, his steady gaze, the way he'd made them feel human again, it clung to them like the Seattle mist. They returned to the Velvet Haven, telling themselves it was just for the vibe, but deep down, they hoped to see him. The bar was packed, a Saturday night frenzy of glitter and bass. Ezra scanned the crowd, their hearts sinking when Julian wasn't there. But someone else was. The wiry man from before, his name, they'd learned, was Vince, lurked near the bar, his eyes locking onto Ezra like a hunter spotting prey. Ezra's stomach churned. They ordered a drink, trying to focus on the drag show, where a performer named Sapphire owned the stage in a sequined gown. But Vince's presence was a splinter in their mind. He approached again, this time bolder, leaning too close. "You're back," he said, his breath sour with cheap beer. "Didn't think you'd be alone." "I'm fine," Ezra snapped, their voice sharper than intended. Vince's smirk widened. "You don't look fine." Before Ezra could respond, Julian appeared, cutting through the crowd like a beacon. "They're with me," he said, his tone calm but unyielding. Vince hesitated, then slunk away, but not before muttering something Ezra couldn't catch. Julian guided Ezra to a quieter corner. "You okay?" he asked, his hand resting lightly on their shoulder. Ezra nodded, though their pulse raced. "He's creepy as hell." "He's trouble," Julian said, his voice low. "I've seen him around. He's got a reputation, hustles people, preys on anyone who seems vulnerable." The night shifted after that. Julian stayed close, his presence a shield. They talked about everything and nothing. Ezra's love for old sci-fi novels, Julian's dream of opening a youth center. Their laughter was a lifeline, pulling Ezra from the edge of their anxiety. But the tension didn't vanish. Vince hovered at the bar's edges, watching. When Ezra went to the bathroom, they found a note slipped into their jacket pocket. "You can't hide forever." No signature, but Ezra knew who it was from. Their hands shook as they showed it to Julian. "We need to tell someone," Julian said, his face grim. He flagged down the bartender, a trans woman named Riley, who knew Vince's history. "He's been banned before," Riley said, tossing her braids. "I'll make sure security keeps an eye out." Ezra wanted to believe that was enough, but the note felt like a warning of something bigger. Julian walked them to their car again, the rain heavier now. "Don't let him get in your head," he said, his voice steady. "You're not alone in this." Ezra wanted to believe him. They wanted to lean into the warmth of his words, the way his hand lingered on theirs. But as they drove away, headlights flashed in their rearview mirror. Too close, too persistent. Was it Vince? Their heart pounded, the road blurring. They lost the car in a maze of side streets, but the fear stayed. Back at their apartment, Ezra locked the door, checking it twice. Julian's number was now in their phone, a small anchor in the storm. But the note burned in their pocket, a reminder that peace was fragile and danger was closer than they'd thought. Ezra stopped going to the Velvet Haven for a week, but the bar and Julian kept pulling them back. They texted Julian daily, their conversations a mix of banter and vulnerability. He sent them photos of his community garden, of kids he mentored painting murals. Ezra sent back memes and snippets of code they were tinkering with, trying to rebuild their confidence. But Vince's shadow loomed. Ezra spotted him twice outside their apartment, always at a distance, always watching. They reported it to the police, but without proof, there was little to be done. The fear was a weight, pressing harder each day. Julian insisted they meet somewhere new, a queer-owned coffee shop in Fremont. There, over lattes, Ezra spilled everything. The startup's failure, their fear of Vince, the way they felt unmoored. Julian listened, his hand resting on the table, close but not touching. "You're not alone in this," he said again, and this time, Ezra believed him. Their connection deepened, a slow burn of trust and longing. One night, Julian invited Ezra to a fundraiser at a community center where queer youth showcased their art. Ezra watched Julian move through the crowd, his warmth drawing people in. They felt a pang of something new. Hope, maybe, or something more. But Vince wasn't done. At the fundraiser, Ezra caught him in the parking lot, leaning against a car, staring. Julian noticed too and pulled Ezra aside. "We need to confront this," he said. "He's escalating." They told Riley, who'd come to the event, and she connected them with a friend in security, Marcus. Marcus dug into Vince's past and found a history of harassment, even a restraining order from another state. "He's dangerous," Marcus warned. "But he's careful. You need to be smarter." Ezra's fear spiked, but Julian's presence grounded them. That night, at Julian's apartment, they sat on his couch, a jazz record spinning softly. Julian reached for Ezra's hand, his touch steady. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. Ezra's walls crumbled, and they leaned into him, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like coming home. But the moment shattered. A brick crashed through Julian's window, glass exploding across the floor. A note was tied to it. "Back off, or you're both done." Ezra's heart stopped. Julian pulled them close, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We're not backing down." They called the police, who took the note as evidence. Marcus promised to dig deeper. But as Ezra lay awake that night, Julian's arm around them, they knew this was bigger than one man's obsession. Vince wasn't just a creep. He was a threat, and he wasn't acting alone. Ezra and Julian became a team, bound by fear and something deeper. Marcus uncovered Vince's ties to a local hate group, a network targeting queer spaces in Seattle. The brick wasn't random. It was a warning, part of a larger plan to intimidate. The police were now involved, but evidence was thin, and time was running out. Ezra moved into Julian's apartment for safety, their days a mix of vigilance and stolen moments of joy. They cooked together, laughed over bad reality TV, and fell into each other's arms at night. Ezra found strength in Julian's belief in them, and Julian admitted he'd been running from his own grief until Ezra gave him a reason to fight. The community rallied. Riley organized a town hall at the Velvet Haven, where queer locals shared stories of harassment. Sapphire, the drag queen, led a fundraiser to install security cameras. Ezra spoke, their voice shaking but resolute, about reclaiming their space. The crowd cheered, and Julian squeezed their hand, pride in his eyes. But the threat grew. Marcus intercepted messages linking Vince to a planned attack on the bar during its annual Pride event. The police set up a sting, and Ezra and Julian agreed to act as bait, their hearts pounding but their resolve stronger. The night of the event, the Velvet Haven was a riot of color and defiance. Ezra and Julian stood together, surrounded by friends, Riley, Sapphire, Marcus. When Vince and his group appeared, the police moved in, arresting them before they could act. The crowd erupted in cheers, a wave of relief washing over Ezra. In the aftermath, Ezra and Julian stood outside the bar, the city glowing around them. "I came here to escape," Ezra said, their voice thick with emotion. "But I found so much more." Julian kissed them, slow and sure. "We found each other." The bar's neon sign flickered above, a beacon of resilience. Ezra knew the fight wasn't over. Hate lingered, always would. But they'd learned something vital: love, community, and courage could outshine even the darkest fears. They'd walked into the Velvet Haven broken, but they left whole, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next.